Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the QRL Show, live edition. Myself and Michael Strike are here from the QRL core team, and we're excited to be joined for another appearance by Hunter Beast. Hunter is a Bitcoin Rust developer, well known in the community, author of BIP 360, which is paid a quantum resistant hash. And we really
Actually, it's called Pay to Merkle Root now, by the way.
Pay to Merkle root, yep, which we'll get into. We're actually going to show it in the slide. So we'll even have a slide in about 2-3 minutes on that. Thanks for the correction there, Hunter. It's good to have you with us. And for those viewing in the audience, our live shows, we like to kind of go through some of the latest, whether it's the latest quantum news and how that pertains to crypto and blockchain and post quantum. But for today's episode, we have a lot to get into with Hunter at the intersection of Bitcoin and post quantum security. So, as a starting point, I think it would be helpful, as we have done in previous episodes with guests, to let Hunter give the audience, new and old, a little bit of a high level background on himself and his work tied to where everything's at today with BIP 360. And Michael, you can kind of give an overview following that on our project, and we can move into the show. So, Hunter, great to have you with Michael and I. Hunter, give the audience a bit of intro on yourself.
Yeah, so I've been a Rust developer since 2018. I've been working Web3 around the same time. Transitioned to Bitcoin full time in February 2021 when I first read the Bitcoin Standard. It was a hefty book. It was a really heady book. A lot of really good stuff in there, and then also. About 2 years ago, a little bit more than that now, first started working on the problem of Bitcoin's quantum resistance. And the reason why is because I started to realize that it was basically an understudied threat at the time. And Nick Carter's more recent rhetoric about people not taking it seriously. That was certainly true at that time. It was definitely discounted by Peter Wohla in 2019 in the original Taproot design, and he even had a tweet that said there will be a long series of incremental improvements before. So basically saying like we will have plenty of warning that they will be a concern, and so and then I was looking through it and everything that existed back then, and I thought that it would be worth my time to take every possible threat to Bitcoin and the crypto ecosystem at a whole, as a larger any threat to the foundation of that ecosystem, which is Bitcoin. And the cryptography that secures it. I mean, the cryptography is also used in Ethereum too, the same curves. So it really is very much an all hands on deck situation. We need to make sure that we do everything we can imagine to address this threat. And as a result, that leads to my work in BIP 360 and some amazing future work that we will be doing as a continuing the mission as part of Surmount Systems, which is a organization that I am bootstrapping and working on. So thank you.
Awesome, Hunter. Appreciate it. I'm sure we'll get into a lot more of that just in upcoming in a few minutes. It's good to kind of have a little bit of that added context. Obviously, for those that are viewing this, some of them might be like us, and that hey, we've been seeing this problem for years, and finally, even in the last 3, 6, 9 months, it's each of these new pieces of information that are coming out, or people that are publicly acknowledging the severity of this quantum threat and that action needs to take place. It's starting to come a little bit more mainstream. I still think it's really early, but Michael, as a starting point, probably within the show, we have some viewers that are maybe new or a little bit of crossover and
Yeah.
aren't as familiar with our project. Could you give a high level on what we're about in QRL as we jump
Yep.
into the episode, and then from there we'll really get into some of the first questions and the
Yep.
meat of the live show?
For any newcomers, Michael Strike, classical career is network engineering for over 20 years. Started in Bitcoin, started mining Bitcoin Was it 2013? So long time ago. Regarding the project, been with the project now for about, I think about 6 years with QRL, and our Genesis block was actually in 2018. So we're 8 years into this as being post quantum secure since the first block. So it's really, I mean, it's been interesting to see, having been fortunate enough to have the ability to connect these dots so early on, and being able to watch things play out. That's been an interesting observation. That being said, we are the we are the we were the first blockchain in the ecosystem to use post quantum security DSAs since the first block, that using government grade NAST cryptographic standards. So, like I said, we've been doing this since 2018. There is no quantum. We're not an ERC20. We are our own coin. We are not a token. We are a coin, and we don't have a migration problem because there is no migration. And we're in QRL 2.0 testnet right now. We'll be enabling EVMs, post-quantum secure EVMs. You'll be able to take Ethereum EVMs, tweak them around a little bit, recompile them, drop them on a chain, have first mover advantage. Essentially, anyone listening, if you're on this podcast right now, and you're a Solidity dev, you could have first mover advantage into post quantum security DeFi, and kick off that entire industry. It's essentially a reboot. Or you can run it in parallel with classical cryptography too, which is probably what I think is more likely the option, is that we'll be running in parallel. But that's the project. If you have any questions, whatever platform you're on, type them in. We'll try to get to them. That's it.
No, appreciate it. Thank you, Strike. I'm going to quickly just pop up. We got a window here. We got our little, show outline, real high level. Just went through intros. Going to jump into BIP 360 a little. Get Hunter's thoughts and ours as well on some of the latest on the quantum papers coming out, or Bitcoin side paper, QSB one. We'll get into some Q&A in a little bit as we wrap it up. That'll probably take up a good chunk. So I think as a good starting point in a second here, Michael, you can get to this first one that we could cover with Hunter. I think it would be good to first cover. You had this one first, Mike, this one out, and then we can expand on this. Can you see my screen here, guys?
Yep, it's showing up. And ultimately, I think we'll just concede this entire question to Hunter. I mean, he's front and center.
Yeah, so it reads out, what is the latest status of BIP 360? How do you feel it's progressing?
Yeah. How's it going?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So essentially, how things went with BIP 360 so far is in I would think about June of 2024, I first started working with my co-author at the time. His name was Kyle, and he's credited in the paper still. And we developed it further on, and in December 18th, 2024, we got our BIP number from John Attic, and who is a Bitcoin core dev and BIP reviewer, and he assigned us 360 on that date, and then that same day was also my first day at Mara, and I joined them because they operated really the only technology, even to this day, that is useful for if you wanted a quantum resistant bridge, or if you wanted a strategy to securely move coins post Q day without revealing the public key. You would essentially need to take it to a private mempool, which isn't ideal, but it's a lot better than having your coins stolen. And so that's why I joined them, and I tried to give them a business model if they could keep it. And We'll see if they do. A couple weeks ago, they laid myself off, and then the next day they laid my supervisor off, and then in the weeks after, all our contractors are getting laid off too. My entire team, essentially.
Oh, so that's relatively recent, so 2 weeks ago.
Yep, yep. 2 weeks ago. Yep. And they laid off also probably. I mean, they say it was 15% of the company, but they've definitely let go more employees and even more contractors. So the number is actually probably a lot more, probably on the order of maybe 50 to 100 people total have been let go from involvement with Mara. Long-term employees, contractors are all kind of funding each other too, and so and I mean that's fine for me. I mean, first of all, I would say that my entire tenure at Mara was probably the least productive I've ever had working for a company, just because of how often we would have meetings about talking about work and not actually doing the work. I think there were just a number of perverse incentives and just strange, like corporate business as usual dynamics there that essentially slowed progress to a crawl. And I'm itching to get back into startup life and really accelerating the timeline. First of all, I don't think that we have as much time as people think we have. Uh,
I
uh,
can agree.
I mean,
Concur.
first of all, I mean, just going from government policy, which it applies regardless of the reality of the threat. The first leg of the CNSA 2.0 timeline, which was introduced in 2022, kicks in January 1st, 2027, and it basically makes it illegal for the government to procure technology, new technology at least, new systems and new vendors that make use of RSA and elliptic curve cryptography. And so essentially that is, I believe that's going to when people start to realize that even just government policy is essentially forcing us into PQC, uh, that essentially brings up some awkward questions about the SBR and other big, like crypto initiatives within the US government, because that really does complicate that narrative, especially when we're talking about like I mean the really the only two entities that are worth talking about in this conversation of the quantum threat, they're not corporations, they're nation states, and it's really the NSA and the PLA that are the two primary, like, adversaries here that we need to worry about. And so, from a national security perspective, it makes zero sense for us to adopt a reserve asset that is vulnerable to quantum threats and quantum attacks. And as a result, it's going to reflect very poorly on Bitcoin's price, which of course then reflects on its security model. And that's why I think it's important for us to accelerate the timeline and work on try every imaginable thing we could everything we can imagine, basically, to make sure that Bitcoin is quantum resistant. And if we can accomplish that, we can accomplish anything else, except maybe with one exception. I've looked at the Ethereum roadmap for security, and honestly, I'm not sure they're going to be ready in time. Like, I mean, I think Solana might have a chance, but I'm really not convinced that Ethereum will have the 2 to 3 years they estimate would take them to essentially secure every uh, problematic thing that's currently in Bitcoin from in Ethereum. I mean, in Ethereum. Uh, um, so yeah. Anyway,
Ethereum scale is so much larger. I mean, it's everywhere. It has so much more functionality, so much
Yep.
more utilitarian
The
value.
complexity
Everything,
is
the
enormous.
complexity is
Yep.
order of magnitudes.
Yep.
Right, and that's
Yep.
just that's not including the wallet. That includes wallets. That includes hardware. That includes everything.
Yeah.
And if you remember ETH 2.0, let's just use that as a baseline example.
Yeah, how long that took.
You remember
Yeah.
the estimates? Remember what, you know?
Yep. I remember the proof by construction, like like it took them many years.
If I was a betting man, I am a betting man.
I was gonna say a little bit.
We want this ecosystem to live. It's one of the reasons QRL is here.
Sure.
But these timelines, and I say this with the utmost sincerity, these timelines are not doable. They're not realistic. They're
not realistic even in theory, as Hunter has pointed out. There's a stark difference between when stuff needs to get done and
we're just getting right now on crypto Twitter to where people are actually starting to realize that this is a philosophical problem on freeze, no freeze. This conversation is just happening now with BIP361 and Hunter, and you and I will talk about that, right? But this is something, Ryan, we've been talking about this for years now. At the end of the day, you know, Hunter has done a great job with BIP360, and you know that gets us essentially halfway there. But then those are technical solutions. But then when you get into the philosophicals of freeze, no freeze, those at the end of the day, and we'll talk about this probably too. I think consensus, another, as in how immutability was one of Bitcoin's greatest innovations, has become in a lot of ways a vulnerability. I think consensus now in reaching against us on how to move forward with this problem is going to be one of the greatest bottlenecks as well too. And that's just agreeing on what to do before anything else gets executed. But
yeah, Jet, do you want to lead us back into? I think you had a question.
We were talking about
BIP360.
We were talking about BIP360. Yeah. For those that are new, BIP360 is Hunter, your author, co-author, right? One of the two is Bitcoin improvement proposal in order to add post-quantum security into Bitcoin. It doesn't go beyond that and address the legacy DSAs and stuff like that. But if you're new to what BIP360 is, it essentially starts to solve about half of the problem of migrating to Bitcoin post-quantum secure. So back to the question, we're like 18 minutes in. How is that going?
Well, so things are going really well, but so what's interesting is the BIP finally did get accepted as a draft BIP. It's an official BIP now, so I'm an official BIP author, and that's amazing. And this timeline looks correct, and that's pretty good.
Yeah, Strike. And anything to add to here? I pulled this. Strike pulled this morning.
Mm-hmm.
So keep going. I just wanted to pop it up on screen for reference.
Yeah, the only thing I notice is that well, first of all, I didn't realize that BIPs had a version number. That might be hallucinated. I'm not sure. Like the BIPs repo, I don't know. There's like a release of, that's funny. I'll have to look into that. But also another thing is BTQ. So BTQ is interesting. I'm not convinced that they really understand what they're doing. They seem to have introduced a novel proof of work algorithm that sort of includes PQC signature algorithm too somehow. Like their hash rate is absurdly low, and like if it was just supposed to be an upgrade to or testnet, as they say, like it would be as close as possible to Bitcoin, and it really isn't. So that said, like I'm not going to call them scammers because I really at this point it's not constructive. We really need to be building each other up and not tearing each other down. And this really is a all hands on deck scenario. Really, like it works both ways, where if Bitcoin is broken, then the ecosystem is broken. If Bitcoin is secure but everything else is not, then that's also a big problem, in my opinion, because there's just a lot of things that you don't do with Bitcoin, and that's fine. It's and so like I'm encouraged by the way by like Ian Smith's work on the quantum EVM. Hopefully that's helpful to you. I'm working quite closely with him these days on other things, and we're going to be attending Up Next together actually. So Actually, I'm flying out there today, later today. So, yeah.
Okay. So as far as the expected process on BIP 360, you feel like you're about where you expected to be at this point in time?
Oh, well, it's kind of funny. Until Nick Carter got involved, I thought it would take longer, actually. And Nick Carter, he uses a lot of inflammatory rhetoric that essentially, I think, kind of spurred on a lot of the progress that we saw recently. And that was actually pretty helpful, even though if I don't necessarily agree with that approach. That said, it's undeniable the results were there. And both 360 and 361 got approved in quick concession, despite multiple years of back and forth and review. It was, like BIP 360 was one of the most discussed BIPs for sure. One of the more discussed BIPs in the repo, and so not that it was particularly controversial. It was just, I mean, really, like the bike shedding for BIPs is insane. I mean, this is like a major protocol change to like an incredibly difficult and to change protocol. I can only imagine what it'd be to work on the IETF, but regardless of that, yeah, BIPs are also pretty rigorous, especially given Bitcoin's 17 years now of existence.
So let's talk about 361 for a second.
Mhm.
Ryan, I think you have a slide. Yep.
Yeah, I got a slide here on it.
that
I
was
just popped it up. Strike.
So, Hunter, a few weeks ago, we were talking about the philosophy of Bitcoin, the ethos, right, of the of Satoshi's original vision, right, and a lot of that comes down to immutable property ownership, right, and it's BIP 361, as I've been paying attention on X, is moving towards freeze camp mentality, which I see, to your earlier point, I see advocates. I see Nick Carter seems to be like an advocate, but at the same time, he's also saying, "Hey, I don't like this option, but it seems to be like the best one." And I think there was a comment this morning. It read something like, "It's the best financial incentive but it's not principles first." And I had responded back that I always thought principles first was the best approach, something like that. So it's an interesting thing to observe because you're really trying to understand where everyone's at and why they're there. But BIP 361 seems to be leaning towards freeze camp, and for the community, essentially what that means is once you put post quantum out, once you make Bitcoin have the ability to perform a post-quantum secure transaction. In other words, the nodes now have the ability for you to do a transaction and send your Bitcoin to a single address that is post-quantum secure. Now your funds are secure against cryptographically relevant quantum computers. However, that means that your funds are. That doesn't mean the entire blockchain space is. So BIP 361 is saying that essentially at some point you need to disable that old legacy code, and whoever has not migrated, be it people that just don't know how, don't want to, or whatever, have their own reasons. For whatever reasons, whatever gets left behind essentially just gets frozen, and we'll get into this a little bit. Hunter, after it gets frozen, there's this theoretical zero knowledge proof way in which you can go back and possibly recover those funds, and we'll cover that a little bit further. But what are your thoughts on the progress of 361 and what I was just saying?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I also know and speak to Jameson quite a bit. He was one of the primary authors of that BIP, along with Ian Smith. And they're all very rigorous thinkers, and I'm glad they did the work to specify the problem space. But that said, I do have a lot to say on BIP 361. So essentially, the way it works is, first of all, it depends on BIP 360. We need to have a quantum resistant foundation to move coins to securely. The that said, I'm conflicted about it. Well, not even conflicted. It's pretty clear to me. I do not like a number of things that it proposes, and also it's also just really difficult technically to even make some of those things work, because essentially you would need some kind of address index to keep track of exposed public keys, and if you do that, that massively increases the code and features needed in Bitcoin Core or whatever. And also, I mean, you might be able to get like a hacky solution by modifying UTXO set behavior, but again, like it's like either a naive approach or a sophisticated approach. It's still very complicated to essentially accomplish their goal, which is to essentially freeze any coins that have exposed public keys. Right now, the scope of the problem is about 7 million out of the 20 million mined coins have sit behind locking scripts that have an exposed public key for whatever reason. 1.7 million are P2PK, and maybe 100,000 or so are Taproot, and then the remainder are just exposed through address reuse and proof of reserves type mechanisms, and so that's less than ideal. Now, another thing I will point out is that I think this is important whenever we get into discussions about protocol engineering that are somewhat more philosophical. Essentially, the thing to remember about Bitcoin governance is that it's not just technical. There's also a major social and economic component, and it's important to understand those two. I think they're kind of essentially co-equal, and there are two bits of philosophy that I lean on to help me kind of understand that better. First, I call it the first one is Bitcoin social contract, also known as the private property promise. This is something that I think a guy named Waxwing on the mailing list once explained. Essentially, one, there are three clauses here. One, the coin inflation schedule is set in stone. Two, if you can cryptographically validate a transfer, Bitcoin will let you do it. You can always spend your own money. And three, if you locked a UTXO with a certain rule set in the past, that rule set will still be active and let you spend in the future. You can't be locked out of your own money. That's important philosophical background in the Bitcoin sense. Also, in these difficult times, I often fall back on and lean on my Catholic faith to essentially inform these philosophical and moral quandaries. In particular, I think it's important to remember certain aspects of the Ten Commandments. In particular, number 7, you shall not steal, and number 10, you shall not covet your neighbor's goods. And so, regardless of that, that's those. With that as kind of like a philosophical background and lens through how I view this, the three options essentially are freeze or confiscate or whatever you want to call that. The other option on the far extreme is essentially allowing liquidation, allowing some theft, and then so essentially no action. And then the middle ground would be to activate a change, but one that isn't so draconian that prevents all spending vulnerable coins, but essentially mitigates the concern by throttling or reducing the number of coins that are vulnerable that can be spent to say something like 1 per block. And if that was the case, then it would take about 30 years to migrate those coins according to those rules, even just the P2PK coins, and even longer if you include all other public keys. So with all that explained, and by the way, that middle ground proposal is called Hourglass, and that the way I described it was Hourglass, is Hourglass v2. And so I think it's important now to explain the three options through the philosophical lens that I just discussed, unless you have any further comments or questions.
Yeah, Mike, I think you
Okay,
had-
so we're like 30 minutes in. We got a bunch of other questions. I just wanted to do one Thanks for the take on 361. One thing I've noticed that was just strange, and I think on 361 that I'm not completely in line with, is on 361. While 361 mentions the zero knowledge proofs as far as a form of locked funds recovery, what's really understated in the community is that that's all based on hardware deterministic wallets, and you having funds that are secured by a seed phrase, which means that most funds, even if the zero knowledge proof works, are not going to be recovered once they're frozen, because how many people really are using HD wallets when self custody is still is still a operational issue for users? But let's move. I mean, if you're good with that, let's move on to the
Yeah,
next
we got
one.
this one strike you had, we had here, which was. Do you want to jump to this one?
Yeah.
And maybe read it out for those that are just listening or on audio, kind of as they do something else. I'll read
What
it.
do you think?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What do you
Yeah.
think is the biggest threat to actually getting Bitcoin to full chain post quantum security? It's a good one. What do you think, Hunter?
Well, I think that the only thing that could stop us from achieving that goal is if people refuse to change their minds based on new input.
I think I have a similar. Yeah, I think I have a similar take on that. I think with a lot of the feeds and discussion of people talking about this, they'll compare it to banks and centralized organizations and somehow imply that it's the same thing. And I've worked for these organizations, and we're talking about IT departments with an operational team and a design team, maybe a help desk, and maybe 100 employees, right? But in Bitcoin's case, I think getting everyone on the same page without forking the hell out of Bitcoin is going to be the biggest challenge. And that's just to get to the point to where you can implement the code in order to start making the transaction. So that goes back into a little bit of BIP 360, but overall, just as an umbrella, there's a lot of contention online. This is your point actually earlier, Hunter, that people, it's almost like misinformation and disinformation is the currency of Twitter, and there's so much of it that there's a lot of money volume there being moved around.
And adding to that, Strike, that the issue too is we see this with every new release of some piece of potential quote unquote big news of the latest out. All of these news outlets, they are highly incentivized to push that this is the latest and greatest thing. So if people just read the headline, they think that the quantum threat is solved every 4 days. I think this, if you just read the no fork example, that's just one of many. But and I'm not faulting the news outlets. That's obviously they're incentivized to get clicks, and that's how the part of their model works. But you really got to go deeper to understand.
There's too many cooks. You all have to develop one recipe. There's too many cooks in the kitchen. They all work for different companies. They all have different salaries, and they all have their personal ambitions or motivations, if you will. But Hunter, what do you think?
I don't think there's enough cooks, actually. I think this is an all hands on deck situation. We need to essentially, but I call it the vast Hilbert space of wrong ideas, and we need to navigate that. And in order to navigate that, we need all the bad ideas too. We need every idea, really, all hands on deck. And this is
take the pasta, throw it all at the wall.
Exactly.
Would you rather have 10? Would you rather have 10 cooks or 10,000 cooks?
10,000, yeah. And I would find a clever way to essentially address every idea they had, and we would do the work. Yeah,
I would rather have 10.
I mean, I would rather have 10 on my team, and we'll come up with the best solution informed by the idea of tens of thousands, maybe even 10 millions, 10 billion ideas. The ideas are not scarce, for one, and we need to explore all of them, and we need to find the best solution. The only constraint is that is really just a one of time. And so really in this approach, sadly, unfortunately, the conventional wisdom is not going to be helpful for us. We need to approach this with abundance mindset, and we need to also really just be very not afraid of the scale and scope of the problem, because really it is one of the biggest problems and challenges of our time, and we need to solve it now.
It's interesting. I think you and I have a different. We agree on most things. I think we have a different philosophical approach there. In that, I'd rather have 10 people working on this problem that know each other and can get along, rather than 10K all with a a hand on the mixer trying to
It's all a matter of ultimately, in my
not knowing
opinion,
not knowing where they came from, or what their agendas are, or what their personal motivations are, or where their stock is.
So ultimately, the thing that matters here, the only thing that matters here, is merit. And maybe this is naive of me to say, but I still believe that Bitcoin governance is meritocratic. And so, in my opinion, the best solution will rise to the top and become the clearest, most obvious solution based on its merit alone.
But to your point, the meritocracy takes time in order for the positive buoyancy to reach the top. And if you're talking just me, I'm thinking out loud here. We don't have that time.
Well, it's a trilemma. So there's time, speed, and cost, right?
Sure.
Yep. And so that's why I'm planning to raise a lot of money next month to accelerate our efforts at Surmount Systems.
In
VCs,
order to help solve
if
this
you're listening,
problem,
Hunter's raising.
Yep.
to help fund this problem. Are you saying you're personally investing in solving this Bitcoin problem, self-funded, or what?
Well, yeah, all of it. So raising money, putting my own money, partnering with some other
using your money
people.
to help. Okay.
Yeah, all of it. And so there's basically like a big part of this is the forcing function of CNSA 2.0, January 1st, 2027. We need to have very good progress on that and along those lines. And the strategy we'll be using essentially is a first principles first approach, essentially challenging every assumption that we're making. I feel like people are making way too many assumptions about this problem, and heuristics are just not viable. We need to actually do the real research and rigorous thinking and work to specify every aspect. And so we're actually going to have 3 teams in Surmount Systems that will be doing their work in parallel, and they'll work off each other and synergize each other's work. One team will essentially continue the work that we're doing to secure the Bitcoin protocol. The other team will be a red team, so essentially an internal team that will essentially harden and attack our own proposals and in creative ways. And then finally, the third team would essentially be a team that would build AI tooling, custom AI tooling that will help us accelerate the timeline.
So even if so let's say in a perfect world, it's your team. You put it together. Everyone knows each other. You work together. There's not any differences, any deltas of substantial opinion. You still have to have the amplitude among all of the rest of the noise of all of the other teams in the world that have a hand in the future development. So, and to me, that just seems there's just so many voices and so many teams that I think that reaching that consensus and actually getting something implemented without forking the heck out of everything is just going to be a challenge. But
Yeah.
I see forks as inevitable.
To
could
me,
be wrong
it
on
sounds
that.
like an
That's my bad.
engineering problem. Like, really, I would
I
like
am
to
an
build.
so I see things as engineering problems.
Yeah. So like the way I would solve that problem of like there's lots of ideas, lots of proposals, lots of separate teams. I would build essentially a workspace that people can submit their ideas to, and we can rigorously validate and specify and compare all the ideas based on their merit.
Sure.
And
The
quantify.
contrarian of me is going to think that, but I don't want Hunter and his team to be the medium under which I'm entering my ideas. So
Okay, then you do that. You make your own too, and we open source it, so you can
and
run
then
your
we
own
get
and
back
all that.
to
Yeah.
a similar. So to those that are listening, we're essentially, I mean, Hunter and I are agreeing in a lot of ways. We're agreeing on the same philosophies, just potentially different outcomes and how you reach there. And that consensus, I think, at the end of the day, Hunter, I think you can agree that getting consensus on a solution without hard forking Bitcoin is going to be a challenge.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. But I live for that kind of challenge. I think these are wonderful
Me too.
challenges.
And
some of the hardest problems in the world, really. And so that they're
Yeah.
like I'm inspired to work on them and solve them in creative ways. Yeah.
Speaking of people that are taking no, there's we could talk on that one for 20 more minutes. I think we had a part one about a month or so ago for viewers that are watching the first time here. Likely next month or so we'll probably have a part two of it. What I'd like to do just for a few minutes, every couple weeks, it seems, every few days, it seems like there's a new piece of news out there, and the circles that we see in tech and Twitter X. I would like to just quickly go over and see your thoughts. Latest piece just came out, which was the QSB quantum safe Bitcoin transactions without there being a fork. I think Michael and me DM'd on this one earlier. Kind of just curious from a high level, your thoughts on this. A number of people probably viewing this have read the paper. Obviously, the author was very clear that, hey, this is a very last resort. This is probably in theory and in practice, this is not going to go through. But
okay, Hunter, you go first. I have multiple.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first of all, I'm glad this exists because essentially what this does is it addresses the FUD that Bitcoin governance is too hard to solve the problem, and we essentially will never solve it, and thus Bitcoin is going to zero or something. And really, although this idea sounds impractical on its face, I mean, literally, like it would cost you about $150 to rent enough cloud computing to create a quantum resistant signature based on this scheme. The thing is, though, that's only if you're really of high time preference. You could literally run this on your own GPU or Mac Mini or whatever, and it might take weeks to sign a transaction, but still, like, either you pay the money for the renting the cloud computing, or you just run it on your own hardware for weeks. I know that sounds impractical, but you know what? If we don't manage to get our act together, this is a good fallback and addresses the FUD.
I think it sounds impractical in the sense that trying to have your early adopters, people that are tech forward, are going to be a bit more comfortable with it. But it becomes obviously the trust issue part is huge. The hula hoops they'd have to jump through. I think there's components that are interesting to it. I think that it working out in the wild, though, is another beast altogether. It's hard enough to get people to understand in everyday retail that, hey, buy a hardware wallet, let alone doing something where they're going to have to trust. And I think as it goes up of how much crypto people hold, the trust aspect's going to be huge as well. So I don't have too many thoughts other than that.
Out of my seat face.
What's Strike?
This is I'm about to jump out of my seat face. The paper had some cryptographic creativity to it. What I don't like about is how it was sold on crypto Twitter as selling it as a quantum secure solution for Bitcoin, when in reality what it did is remove some of the barriers and expedite the timeline for essentially what would be a BIP 360 equivalent, which solves part of the problem. It doesn't address the legacy it doesn't address legacy DSAs. It almost reads as like, hey, this problem was almost solved if only it wasn't for these pesky transaction fees.
In fairness, though, like Eli Ben-Sisson and all the Starkware team members were
in the paper
abundantly clear
but that's not what people take out of it, and then they put all. Yeah, you're right. Right.
So this is no fault of the authors. It's more just the crypto front-facing complex that ran with the story of saying, "Hey, how can we
against the authors?" I thought it was like I said, cryptographically creative, and I give the authors credit. This is not a zing to them, but what I do have is there are coordinated efforts of misinformation and disinformation campaigns when you start to see the same message over and over and over again, with misleading graphics in titles that is intentionally causing either confusion or misinformation. And the way this paper got sold is, hey, we almost cracked this whole problem. It was almost solved. It was just, oh crap, the transaction fees were too high. Yeah. So and that was the main heartache that I got. Right. It was not the paper itself, but how the community, which we're supposed to be getting our act together and solving this problem, how the actors handled it.
Yeah, I agree that some of the first takes were probably not grounded in.
I didn't see any takes I liked.
They
were all, hey, we almost solved
I think one TLDR one that would be helpful is for those that are viewing this, Dr. Joseph Kearney on our team put together a piece that kind of, if you don't want to go in and, read the paper, do 4 hours of deciphering it, Joseph lays out, hey, what the paper, what was creative about it, tip of the hat to the authors for that. But then he from a high level breaks it down for anyone, whether they're technical or non-technical, in 5 minutes. Hey, the fine print, which is, which we're touching to. So just as an added resource. But back to you, Hunter.
Just 2 things I want to add, just to make sure it's clear, is first of all, I think it's important to mention Hanlon's razor in this discussion. And for your viewers who don't know, Hanlon's razor is essentially, it tells us to never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. And so also, I will say that saying the wrong thing still has value, because that's then our opportunity to jump in and inform and teach. And really, it all is just, everything's good for Bitcoin in the end, right? So even disinformation or misinformation, whatever the intent behind it, we can turn that into something constructive.
I said in an internal discussion yesterday or the day before that, and I said this in it's in a soft way, but each of these pieces of quantum news, post-quantum cryptography, they're in a soft way, all long-term advertising for all the things that we are talking about for many years. So it's obviously some of them are direct, some are very loosely tied to it. But I just want to add one note for those that are viewing. I'm seeing some questions come in from some of the different channels in about a few minutes. Keep some of those questions coming. We're going to be doing live
you might
Q&A
be a little
upcoming.
bit more of an optimist than I am when it comes to the nuances of human nature, because where you see, if I read is where you see valid questions being asked and information trying to be gathered and aggregated, I see repeated thoughts with different synonyms that are making which seem to be misinformation campaigns. So that's just my take. Like I said, we're on the same. I get what you're saying, but I what I'm watching, I just view it differently, and I can't ignore it. Who knows? You could be lawyer. They could be legitimate. Hey, I really want to know this. I'm just not seeing it that way.
Well, it's not that I'm an optimist. It's just that I believe in Jesus. That's really in what he teaches us. That he teaches us grace. He teaches us about redemption. He teaches us to not worry and to live our life in such a way that we, for things that are outside of our control, that we leave it up to God. That's my take on that.
I'm gonna jump to as we
not to be holier than thou or nothing. I'm just saying
no.
It's not like blind optimism. It's more like maybe blind faith, if you want to call it that. But regardless,
we're far similar probably in that respect. I'm just trying to keep theology out of the conversation, because otherwise Ryan's going to go insane after.
No, I think No, I was just, as you guys, as we were talking on that part, I'm just pulling. We got a number of questions that were pulled pre-live, a couple live. I'll quickly just go over just QRL snapshot, just for those that have been keeping up to date. They probably already know on this news since our last live episode 2 weeks back. We had a piece that went out. Our Hellborn audit went through. Obviously, there's good information there. Latest on our blog. Pretty much just that, the audit found no cryptographic vulnerabilities. All the findings, informational, and everything else, findings have been resolved through, the code fixes or, formal docs. So that's just kind of high level housekeeping. What I'd like to do now is there's just, like I said a second ago, there's a number of questions. We call this, Hunter, our Superposition Society. This is our Q&A, a position for our community to be, same place all at the same time. But I want to pull in some questions here. We got a couple that were pre-pulled in. I think as we're answering some of those, I'm going to pull some of them live from the community as well. As a starting question, I'm going to do the first one here. I'll read it out loud for those that are maybe listening on audio if they're going for a walk or, they're on a work laptop and maybe they're just listening in their earbuds. But the first question reads out that we pulled from a Discord, I think yesterday in the DMs. Hunter, I really enjoyed your first appearance on the QRL show. I'd really like to know, what are Bitcoin developer discussions actually like behind the scenes? Is there a lot of collaboration, intensity, politics, all of the above? Thanks. So that's the first question. We'll hand the mic to you, Hunter.
Yeah. Well, so there's really like two ways I can answer that. First of all, Bitcoin devs are pretty few and far between. There's just not that many of us, so we all know each other, and we don't always like have open lines of communication between each other because, first of all, that's a bit of an attack vector, and also like we're all pretty busy working on our own slice of Bitcoin. Now, that said, when we do get together and we do talk, it's always intense, and we're always if you ever hear Alalua Osuntakun, also known as Roast Beef of Lightning Labs, whenever he talks, he's just like a notoriously like fast talker, and it's like that. You have to keep up, and we're always talking. Like when you get like two intellectual peers in the same room or more, even it's hard to keep up, and it's something to behold. And people, it's very powerful. And I mean, we do a lot of work at the space in Denver, and so oftentimes like we'll see we'll have other team members of mine. We'll go in and we'll talk, and we'll go into a conference room or a table, and we'll just like jam on ideas, and it's incredible. I mean, I can only imagine what it must look like to be a fly on the wall in those discussions, and as we're talking about protocols and which byte means this, and that sort of thing, and why, and how we specify all that. And of course, that's all reflected publicly in our contributions to BIPs and the other things. So but hopefully that gives you kind of an idea. It's pretty cool.
Awesome. I appreciate it. It's really, I think a lot of people that are maybe a lot of people are introduced to crypto via ETH or Bitcoin starting out, and then they good, that's the gateway in. But we've just talked to a lot of people over the years where someone will read a book, and it's kind of that allure of whether someone read the Silk Road, and that's how they heard about the Bitcoin, and then they read maybe Nathaniel Popper's book on digital gold, or fill in the blank. That's the kind of that mystique appeal of, hey, what's it actually like? The mention that you just had, Hunter, on the public discussion, we mentioned this last month, but there's the Bitcoin dev mailing list. So if anyone wants to go there, you can literally just go your search query on Google, look it up. You can see different discussions. You can see what Hunter's saying. Use the search function, Command F or whatever system you're using. Check it out and see what's going on there. But I think it's definitely appealing for people to want to hear what it's like. I think also too, people that have been in the space for a while know what it was like during like the block wars. But I feel like the intensity, it makes sense that there's a lot of intensity because there's a lot at stake. And especially with quantum, it's going to be like that on steroids. A lot of people have strong opinions, rightfully so. I think I appreciate your answer on the last one. I'm going to jump into this next one here that was pre-polled, and then maybe we can jump into a couple more community questions. I'll read this one out loud as well. Does working on post-quantum upgrades within BTC ever feel like you're heavily renovating a house while people are still living in it? It's kind of a fun analogy.
Yeah, I mean, a house, unfortunately, is too reductive an analogy in this situation because if you
It's a
ever look
city.
into what a hyper object is, it really is like it's an object that's bigger than anything you can see or touch. The internet is like that. The I think a better analogy actually is more like the system of airports that we have. So like hub and spoke model and all that. It would be like basically we've decided that for national security reasons, everything needs to be automated, and it all needs to be like like an amazing, completely automated system that like really can operate without human intervention. And it's perfectly secure and trustworthy under all situations. And we have to do this upgrade in such a way that doesn't disrupt the operation of the entire network. And it's kind of more like that. It's like a dramatic change in how we do things while keeping the system operating as a whole.
Yeah, all the complexity on the fly. Um, let's go to this next one. What do you got here? Do you think most Bitcoin holders realize just how complex something like a quantum transition actually is in practice? I know this one's broadly applicable question, but hot take on it.
The Hilbert space of bad ideas is quite vast, and there's lots of ideas. And by the way, I don't mean like to be dismissive of ideas in general. I just think that there's really only one right best way for Bitcoin, and that's it really is more complex. It really is very much like a very rich complexity frontier, even which oftentimes there's like a meme where we were born too late to explore the seas, and we were born too early to explore the stars, but now we have the complexity frontier and all the tools we need to navigate it, and this is our moment.
If you can quantify and add values to the different metrics, then I agree with you that there is one best solution.
Yes.
For example, freeze, no freeze, proper donors,
Yep.
some things like that. If you can agree on weights for those metrics, I agree with you that there is one
Yep.
solution.
Yep.
I'd posit that that's the problem, though, is everybody has a different weight on the metrics,
Well,
and that
mhm.
that creates that's where the indifference comes from. So I just in my opinion, just a qualifier that I was thinking out loud.
I mean, well, it's funny you use the word weight here because it is a bit of a loaded term when you go to basically compare all ideas against other ideas, and that has a very rigorous foundation actually in like it is a tractable problem. It's just very computationally intensive, and we understand it to be essentially it relates highly to AI training, also known as gradient descent and backpropagation. And the backpropagation and gradient descent essentially are about 1 trillion times more computationally intensive than inference, or also known as probabilistic autoregressive next token prediction. And so training and inference, they're completely separate things. Training is much harder, and it solves that problem essentially by comparing and adjusting weights iteratively of every idea against all other ideas. And so in a way, one way to potentially solve that problem and inform it is just to apply more training and compute towards that
More
problem.
time.
Yeah.
Scaling laws. I'm gonna jump to this next question. Strike. We got a couple
I'd love to
good
keep
ones.
going on that one.
No, I
let's go,
talk
Ryan.
on AI.
These are never long
components.
enough.
Hey, let's
go down that
schedule
rabbit
this a slot after this just to talk offline. I got one right here. Let's see if I can pop this one up on screen here. I'll read it out loud. I have a question for Hunter. What do you think happens to the entire cryptocurrency ecosystem should Bitcoin fail to adopt post-quantum security in time? Does the entire system collapse?
Well, fortunately, I'm definitely seeing why you asked that question on the QRL show. Is there are definitely a lot of solutions out there, like QRL, like others that are essentially quantum native, and we can fall back onto those if that's still desired at that point. So it's not the end of the world. I mean, the world will continue to live, to go on, right? Like we will still be alive after Q Day. We might even know that Q Day occurred.
What
until
about
much
the
later.
banks, though, Hunter? I'm
You
joking.
will. I don't think you will know that Q Day occurred because the signatures cryptographically would look the same as if the
Exactly.
user had done it, whether a quantum computer did it. So people are always pointing towards Q Day.
Yeah.
And I make the argument, you're not going to, this is not Y2K when you had a definite time that everyone knew about. And the lines of code to know exactly what you're not going to even know it happened, but I'm not very good at making friends.
but-
I'm better at stating facts on Twitter than I'm about making friends.
Yeah,
Fair
let's
enough.
see what other. We got a couple other ones in here. I can pull up.
For sure. The other thing I would just add is just that it's not the end of the world, even for Bitcoin. I mean, we could still get our act together. It's going to be a mess, but we could still find a way to thread that needle, hopefully, and recover other things. It really is very much a mess, though, and I would like to avoid that if we can. But regardless, yeah, I mean, we just
You think there's a scenario in which it's not a mess?
Yeah, without a doubt.
You do think that there's a scenario that does exist that could go without without chaos?
Yeah.
Okay.
We just have to.
Ryan, we're not going to have enough time for that.
Hey, well, like I said, we're gonna have a nice part 2. I mean, there's gonna be a lot more coming up from Hunter upcoming, which would be good. We can, whether we want to do it,
keep it going.
Honestly, we should probably just do this every month. And
just
like,
recurring, just have a little nice round table. I'll mod it.
But
yeah, here I'll pull up another one. We might have got to parts. This is another one. Elliot within Hunter, do you think BTC upgrades before ECC is broken?
What kind of ECC? Yeah. Assuming SECP 256K1, I guess.
Yep.
Not RSA 2048, because
Bitcoin
security is easier to break than RS 2048.
So. It is. Yep. Okay. And I mean, there's some nuance also there, and some strategy and creativity that I do not have the time to explain, but I'm pretty confident that we can accomplish this. And I even put my money where my mouth is too. There's a Predix market. Predix is a Lightning-based prediction market, and I did buy 360,000 shares of. Does Bitcoin or BIP360 activate on mainnet by the end of the year?
Not financial advice.
This show is for entertainment and informational purposes only. So no, but that's cool. That it's like a skin in the game example. And continue, Hunter.
If ECC on Bitcoin is broken, you're not going to buy a quantum computer. You're not going to know. Not that I was asked, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, it really is spook technology. I mean, literally, the capability could exist even now, and they're just not doing it for whatever reason.
Yeah. Let's. I got a couple more. This one's just more of a. I don't know. I don't know what this acronym DAT one. You guys fill me in if I'm not up to date with the young folks.
Oh yeah, wallet.dat files are essentially where so Satoshi originally.
What here. Got it.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So Satoshi originally designed the protocol in such a way that a unique key is used for every transaction, and we kept these keys. We didn't have HD derivation back then, BIP32 or BIP39 seed phrases. None of that existed. So we just kept track of all the secret keys in a file on your computer on disk, and that's how it was. And
fun fact: in the original white paper, property ownership is defined as having the private key.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
For a second, I thought DAT was an acronym for
if
something else.
if you're a sufficiently powerful quantum computer, right, or a CRQC, then by Nakamoto consensus and strict interpretation of the paper, you do own that. You do have property rights. Fun fact. Uncomfortable fact.
But yeah, Strike. Do you? I'm trying to think. It looks
okay,
like
we do have some. I got a few minutes left.
Hunter, do you have any other questions? Any questions at the top of mind?
What are major differences between 360 and 361? 360 essentially Hunter, would you say that 360 essentially gives us the ability for quantum preparation and be able to perform a transaction? And 361, go ahead.
Yeah. So essentially, 360, what it solves is the problem that Taproot outputs are whenever you send coins to them, that exposes their public key immediately. So there's in BIP 360 we explain. And this is helpful. Like, we have a helpful glossary or terminology section where we explain the difference between a long exposure attack and a short exposure attack, and how a long exposure attack is more likely, though that is an assumption, to manifest before short exposure. Essentially, long exposure is predicated on the fact that when you have all the time in the world to work over a public key, you don't really need a particularly powerful or perfect quantum computer, because you just have more wax at the pinata, essentially, with Shores. And Shores already is probabilistic, even in the best case, maybe 80%. So it's not a sure thing. You need, these things are designed to whack the pinata multiple times. And so there's that. Then BIP 360, essentially what it does is it allows us to have the capability that exists in Taproot that gives people the option to choose which way to spend their funds in a pre-committed Merkle route of scripts that essentially could be spent by the wallet at spend time. It gives wallet spend time optionality. And it also makes it quantum secure against long exposure attacks. So it addresses a concern around long exposure around pay to Taproot. Well, unfortunately, we didn't get to talk about Olaolu's work on Lifted Fox Coin. That's fascinating work as well. Actually, technically, his variation of LFC for Bitcoin. That is actually an important distinction. And then also, BIP 361, it depends on 360. 360 gives us the foundation for pre-QC optionality in wallets, and it does that in such a way that does not confiscate funds from existing Taproot users by simply creating a new output type, SegWit v2, whereas Taproot is SegWit v1 and native SegWit is SegWit v0. And then additionally, 361 depends on that capability to have a safe, secure way to keep secure your funds and be able to spend them in a way that's not vulnerable. But 361 then additionally specifies certain incentive structures. Some of them are carrot incentives, some of them are stick incentives, but mostly just like certain threats and timelines to maybe force the migration to secure the network. That said, I'm not sure that's particularly necessary, but it's good to have that out there as like one of the things that could happen if we don't satisfy come up with a satisfying enough solution, almost like a compromise between both groups. And literally, it is BlackRock and MicroStrategy who is going to back BIP 361 if we don't get our shit together.
So I think it's important to qualify this also, that these are all these solutions that have gaps are all user initiated transactions. This is not an automated process. Bitcoin was never designed to automate itself into post-quantum security under new DSA structures. So all of this has to be done by the user or by an account with the private key in order to follow through.
Yeah, I think Strike, I think as a wrap up, I think we brought a number of questions. Obviously, we could talk for another hour with Hunter on this. Just as like wrapping up, and then I'll let Hunter give the audience some best places to find him.
You answered the .wallet.dat. I did a poll the other day. If Satoshi woke up the milk, why is it phrased like that?
Yeah, you can just fill it. You did a personal poll. Just give that.
I did a personal poll on if Satoshi's. Now, to be granted, my subs may have some bias. As a core team member at QRL, there's some biasness in the subs, but I did do a poll. I have two polls that I want to run. I have two polls that I want to run at scale. The first one is freezing funds, even if on chain and democratically voted. Is that an acceptable path forward for Bitcoin? And a lot of people said no in my feeds, but I'll admit to the biasness. Is I think we need to run that. I think we need to run that at scale. And there was the other one was if Satoshi's, which gets back to the question there with the wallet.dat. If Satoshi's funds started to move, would you believe to be a CRQC or actual Satoshi himself? My point being earlier that you wouldn't be able to tell the difference because nodes don't contain the metadata or the source IP or collect that information in order to garner and communicate with each other in order to be able to sufficiently put together a data set in order to which to make that determination. So a lot of people, my subs went to CRQC, but I think that is another question that needs to be run at scale. How would the ecosystem interpret that? So maybe we can get, I don't know, someone to one of the influencers to do that, because I think that would answer that question greater. But yes, Ryan, we are at time, so let's begin to wrap this up.
Yeah, no, just as I was touching, I really appreciate all those in the community and, like online and socials for bringing in some of those questions. As Hunter alluded to, there's a number of topics that we'll definitely get into on the next one, because each of those could be a 15-minute segment on its own. But just for, added context for those that are new or, coming in, hearing about the quantum threat, obviously, QRL.org is the best place to learn about what we're up to. Here's some, going to the Zon docs with, QRL 2.0 is obviously a good spot. Socials here, I think, is a closing part, in our conversation today, specifically here with myself, Michael, and Hunter is, Hunter, it'd be good to let you take over for a moment, let the viewers know as we close this out. We've all been, talking about, the quantum threat and, what our takes on what can be done about it. Give viewers, where's a good spot? I think we mentioned, obviously, we included you on the announcement, Crypto Quick at Twitter, but give the best couple places for those to follow what you're doing between now and our next conversation, and we'll wrap it up from there.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely look into bit360.org and also surmount.systems. Both sites have lots of information there. Also on my GitHub profile, I do have recently some members of the Solana community. They created a meme coin for bit360, and I just decided to embrace the chaos, and we have a pretty cool community, and so there is a CA there in my GitHub profile for people's benefit. And just happy to keep the discussion going, and love to talk about this stuff. And I'm glad that you're giving me your platform, and I'm happy to return the favor. And I just again, please try to keep things constructive, be kind to each other, and just try your best to have an abundance mentality that moves everything forward, all hands on deck, faster than hopefully the attack can potentially ever occur. And so, thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you, Hunter. Myself and Michael, obviously, we really enjoy our conversations with you, and for the audience to be able to see that as well. It's good to keep up to date. I'm sure what we've just seen the last 6 to 8 weeks with quantum and post-quantum crypto, a lot has happened. I'm sure in 6 or 8 weeks, something new will happen that will even, give us even more to discuss. But until that next episode, for those viewing, make sure to keep those digital assets post-quantum secure, and we will see you all in the next episode. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Hunter. See ya.
Thank you, Hunter. Thanks, Ryan.